Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 4th July 2024 and we have some important articles for today's discussion, and one by one we'll discuss all of those important articles both from Hindu and Indian Express newspapers. And these articles that we are going to discuss are very important from the exam point of view, so we will try to understand them. Right, so before actually discussing these important articles, you all knew that we have one practice question that I have given to you yesterday, and this is also a very important question because it is very often in news, and there is also a probability that this question may reflect in your examination. The question is, right to be free from the adverse effects of climate change is encompassed within which of the following fundamental rights of Indian Constitution? Now, if you can look into Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, it is a broad fundamental right and it is also evolving over a period of time. So taking climate change into account, recently Supreme Court has declared that the right to be free from the adverse effects of the climate change, because climate change has been impacting the lives of the people across India, not just across India but across the world. It has been impacting the lives and livelihoods of the people, and it is recognized that providing environment which is free from the adverse effects due to the climate change is the responsibility or the obligation of the state. So giving recognition to that particular right, Supreme Court has recently declared that the right to be free from the adverse effects of climate change is encompassed as the fundamental right under Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And when we talk about this, we all knew that Article 14 specifically deals with the right to equality. It deals with the right to equality. And Article 21 deals with right to life and personal liberty, right? Right to life and personal liberty. So when I say right to equality, and when you link climate change and adverse effects of climate change with right to equality, it is not same on all sections of the people, right? So it is not same or the adverse effects of climate change, it is not same on all sections of the people. For example, rich and poor impacted differently because of the climate change. Now, poor are more vulnerable due to adverse effects of climate change, but on the other hand, rich, due to they have resources, the necessary resources to cope up with the excess or negative impacts of the climate change or adverse effects of the climate change. And because of that reason, Supreme Court has recognized this particular right is part of Article 14, right to equality, and Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, because the climate change has been impacting the lives and livelihoods of the people. So therefore it is included in the right to life, and it puts some obligation on the state to ensure that the right to life, especially the environment, should be protected. And also it is the obligation of the state to provide environment which is free from the adverse effects of climate change. Right now, if you look into the explanation, what was the case in that particular case, Supreme Court has declared the right to be free from adverse effects of the climate change, that is K. Ranjit Singh and others versus Union of India, right? So K. Ranjit Singh and others versus Union of India and others. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court has advocated the right to be free from the adverse effects of climate change. And in fact, so this particular right is identified is part of both right to life and right to equality under Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Right, so fundamental rights, we all knew that they are mentioned in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and Article 14 deals with right to equality and Article 21 deals with the right to life and personal liberty. Now, if we can talk about Article 14 in a bit more specific manner, the state shall not deny to any person equality before law and equal protection of laws within the territory of India. So that is what Article 14 specifically mentioned in the Indian Constitution. And when we talk about Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, states clearly that no person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except according to the procedure established by law. However, this procedure established law was, the way that we cannot violate Article 21, or we cannot take away the right to life of individual except according to the procedure established by law. But if you remember, in Menaka Gandhi judgment, Supreme Court has held that this was in 1987. So in this particular judgment of Menaka Gandhi, the Supreme Court has also recognized that in addition to the procedure established by law, it has also recognized due process of law, right? Due process of law. Now, when I say, when Supreme Court says that, Article 21 should not be violated, right to life and personal liberty should not be violated except according to the procedure established by law. Okay, so if Parliament passes a law to take away the life of an individual, then the violation of Article 21 would be justified because it has a parliamentary sanction. So that is procedure established by law. But in Menaka Gandhi judgment, Supreme Court has come up with a due process of law, and this due process of law has mandated that it should not be only through procedure established by law, but any law which takes away or abridges Article 21 of the Indian Constitution must be fair and just, right? So those laws must be fair and just. So only then the Article 21 can be abridged or taken away. So that is what the Supreme Court stands with respect to Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And again, if I can repeat that question, K. Ranjit Singh and others versus Union of India and others. So in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court has recognized right to free from the adverse effects of climate change, and this has recognized right under Article 14, right to equality, and Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, right? So I hope you get some content about this. Now today also I have one more important practice question. So question is, consider the following statements. So the first statement is, in case of a zero FIR, police cannot claim that they have no jurisdiction of the area where offense has committed. And second option, zero FIR was introduced on the recommendation of Justice Verma Committee, right? So this is specific to new criminal laws which were effect from last few days. Specifically about the zero FIR. So if you have some basic idea about the zero FIR, you can answer this question, right? So try to answer this question in the comment section. This is also a very important question, and correct answer I will provide you in tomorrow's class. Now without any delay, let's start our discussion with few important articles. And the first article is about the decline in levels of poverty in India in recent times. So there is a significant decline in poverty levels in India according to a research report by National Council of Applied Economic Research. So this National Council of Applied Economic Research has found out that there is a significant and substantial decline in the levels of poverty in India, right? So if I can tell you that poverty in India as per 2011 census, if I can talk about 2011 census and the prevalence of poverty in India, it was around 21%. So 21% of poverty in India 2011. However, due to a rapid economic growth that India has registered in recent times, so there has been a substantial decline in the levels of poverty, along with the government measures also to eradicate and alleviate poverty. In fact, Sustainable Development Goal number 1. So it also talks about alleviation of the poverty by 2030, right? So because of that reason, the government has taken number of measures to alleviate poverty. But recent times we have seen pandemic also. So pandemic has also made this progress in poverty, so a little slower, because what happens with the pandemic has led to the lockdowns. Pandemic has led to lockdowns, and there was a decline in economic growth. Not just decline in economic growth, that has also led to the recession like conditions across the world. Recession. So the decline in economic growth and recession is primarily because of the supply chain disruption, right? So we all knew that supply chain disruption also took place during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the lockdown, decline in economic growth, especially the decline in demand, and recession like conditions and supply chain disruptions, all these factors have done. So they reduce the capacity of the industries, and they also reduce the production, because lesser demand and lesser production, and that lead to the laying off of employees by these industries, and that has contributed to the unemployment problem. So there was a huge unemployment problem during the pandemic times, and this unemployment has led to the reverse migration also, right? So we also knew about this reverse migration. What is this reverse migration? So reverse migration essentially means that earlier people used to migrate from rural areas to urban areas. So this is the usual migration pattern. But due to COVID-19 pandemic, what has happened? So there was a reverse migration. People started migrating back to the rural areas from the urban areas, right? So that has led to the picking up in agricultural activity, because now people who migrated into the rural areas from the urban areas, now they started engaging in the agriculture sector. And because of that reason, during the pandemic times, we have seen that there is a growth in the agricultural productivity as well. So we'll discuss about this. There's a decline in poverty levels in India. What was the rate of decline, and what were the factors which contributed to the decline in poverty in India, right? So this research report is published by National Council of Applied Economic Research. Now understand one thing, that whenever you are writing any answer about poverty or decline in poverty in India, so you just have to quote such agencies and their findings about the decline in poverty, because that provides some sort of a credibility and legitimacy to your answer, and that in fact enriches your answer. It will not make your answer more generic, right? So it is always advisable that you just quote the reports provided or submitted by these organizations about the decline in poverty. So this research body has said that there is a significant decline in the levels of poverty in India, despite there were challenges because of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So as I've already told you, how COVID-19 pandemic created a lot of challenges, and that even led to the problem of unemployment. So this is what the finding of the report about the significant decline in the levels of poverty. And in fact, according to the study by this National Council of Applied Economic Research, so the name of the study was Rethinking Social Safety Nets in Changing Society, right? So Rethinking Social Safety Nets in Changing Society was the name of this report, which is published by National Council of Applied Economic Research. Now this particular report has highlighted that poverty in India was declined from 21.2%. Remember, in the beginning I have already told you that according to 2011 census, poverty was 21%, right? So it was 21.2% in 2011, and it was declined from 21.2% to 8.5% in 22-23. Right, so this is how the poverty levels were declined. So this is how poverty was substantially or significantly declined. Now we'll understand what is poverty. We will have a brief definition of poverty, and then we will also understand what are the basic elements of poverty. When I say poverty, what are the deprivations which comes under the poverty, right? Now when we talk about poverty, it's not just about lack of income, right? So very often we see poverty, we very often associate poverty with income, right? But poverty does not mean that lack of income. We should not associate poverty only with income alone, because income is just one element which makes people poor. And apart from income, there are also elements like healthcare, right? So whenever people receiving poor healthcare or poor healthcare access or facilities, So that also part of poverty. And lack of education or inadequate education, so that also comes under poverty. Unsafe living conditions, lack of sanitation, hygiene, and vulnerability to violence that has been taking place, civil war like conditions. So all these factors comes under poverty or make people poor, and this is how the multidimensional poverty is actually counted, right? So this is a multidimensional poverty when people are facing number of deprivations. So it is known as multidimensional poverty, and it is just simply beyond the income. So I hope it is a very generic and clear also, because we cannot associate poverty with just income alone. So whenever people were not getting adequate health care, adequate education, and even at that particular region there is a higher chance of violence, and people are struck with the disasters caused by climate change. So all these factors are components or elements of poverty. And in fact, when we talk about the multidimensional poverty in the sense that poverty in different elements, right? So this multidimensional poverty is being measured by the Niti Aayog. Okay, so multidimensional poverty is measured by Niti Aayog, National Institute of Transforming India. And this multidimensional poverty captures different deprivations that people have been facing. Okay, so people have been facing deprivations in terms of healthcare, education, and unsafe living conditions, violence, and disasters, right? So therefore, it actually captures overlapping deprivations and dimensions in poverty, especially in the areas of healthcare, education, and living standards. Now, when I say multidimensional poverty, so this multidimensional poverty actually measures multiple deprivations that people have been facing. So people have been going through. So those multiple dimensions or multiple deprivations include poor healthcare access for the people, or lack of educational facilities, and poor living standards, no sanitation, hygiene, and disempowerment of the people, poor quality of work, or lesser wages, or higher working hours, and even facing the threat of violence, living in areas of environmentally hazardous. Among all these things comes under the multidimensional poverty, and these were different components of multidimensional poverty, right? So whenever people have been facing all or most of these components, so we can say that those people are multidimensionally poor. Now whenever imagine that a place called Ye, right? So a place called Ye, and in this particular place called Ye, there were living around 5,000 people, right? So 5,000 people were living in this area. So these 5,000 people have been facing multiple deprivations, like they do not have educational facilities or healthcare access, and they also suffering some sort of a violence, and frequently they are suffering with disasters, no sanitation, hygiene, and no employment opportunities, and women empowerment was lacking in these areas. So when this area has been facing all these problems, we can say that area A has been suffering with multidimensional poverty, right? So it has been suffering with the multidimensional poverty, right? So I hope you have understood about this concept of multidimensional poverty. And poverty is not just about lack of income, right? So in fact, any person who is deprived of more than half of these components, right? So a relative weight is being assigned to all these components, and any person who is suffering the poverty more than half of these components, we can say that that particular person has been suffering with the multidimensional poverty. Now what are the key findings of the report that was published by the National Council of Applied Economic Research on the declining levels of poverty? So it has published some interesting data and significant data about the declining levels of poverty, right? So in India, poverty substantially declined from 38.6% to 21.2%. So earlier in the year 2004, 2006, 2005, 2004 to 2005, so in this years, poverty in India was around 38.6%. Right? So out of total number of people, so 38.6% of the people were suffering with the poverty. So by 2011 and 12, the poverty was reduced from 38.6% to 21.2%, right? So in fact, it is a significant progress in terms of reducing the levels of poverty. So we can say that it is around 16% reduction in the levels of poverty, despite there was a global economic crisis that took place in the year 2008. Now whenever you're writing an answer, make sure that you write all these data about the declining levels of poverty, so that your answer gets some legitimacy or credibility also, right? So again, from 2011-12, so poverty was 21.2%. From 2011-12 to 2022-24, the poverty was reduced from 21.2% to just 8.5%. So again, now the total number of poor is were just 8.5% only. So despite challenges created by the pandemic, in the year from 2020, 21 and 22, so despite the pandemic, so we have substantially reduced the levels of poverty in India. Now what are the factors which are responsible for the reduction in the levels of poverty? So there are a number of factors which have contributed to the reduction of poverty. First and foremost, economic growth played a very important role, right? So economic growth played a very important role, and in fact economic growth has resulted in substantially reducing the levels of poverty. So despite there were difficulties because of the pandemic, so poverty continued to decrease, and that has been underscoring India's resilience for India's economic growth, resilience of India's economic fabric. So despite such difficulties, we were largely successful in reducing the levels of poverty, and in fact, so that has been indicating India's resilient economic growth. Now when we talk about the economic growth in India, so one of the major reform that we need to talk about was 1991 economic reforms, right? 1991 economic reforms. So in this 1991 economic reforms, so we have introduced liberalization, privatization, globalization, and more reforms, right? LPG reforms, they were also known as LPG reforms. Now after LPG reforms in 1991, there was a significant increase in India's economic growth, and we were able to attract the foreign investment also, and that has also led to the significant growth in the service sector. So earlier, if you look into the Indian economy and the structure of Indian economy, so we were majorly dependent on agriculture sector, right? So agri-based economy, Indian economy was agri-based economy, because more than 50% of India's population are directly and indirectly dependent on agriculture sector. So despite the total contribution of agriculture sector was lower, but majority of India's population was engaged in agriculture sector. So we also have a minuscule presence of industry and even the service sector also, industry plus service sector also. Now when we talk about the agriculture sector, there was a kind of a disguised unemployment that was prevalent, right? So productivity is less, but more number of people were engaged in the agriculture sector. However, industry has the potential to accommodate excess workers in the agriculture sector, and it could also create a sustainable employment opportunities and gainful employment opportunities, social security and social safety nets for the people. But what happened was, after LPG reforms, so we skipped industry and we directly jumped to the service sector, right? So we have neglected industry, we directly jumped from industry to agriculture sector to the service sector. So that makes Indian growth jobless growth, because when we talk about the service sector is not a labor intensive sector. It is just a capital intensive sector, but it is not a labor intensive sector or employment intensive sector. And because of that reason, service sector was not able to create enough employment opportunities. Now, employment opportunities in the sense that if it creates employment, social security, social safety nets, and that would significantly enhances the living standards of the people, right? So it is not free from the challenges. There were a number of challenges in this regard when it comes to reduction in levels of poverty that you can clearly see in this infographic. See, so whenever you're presenting answer, you can also draw such innovative, charts, innovative graphs, so that clearly indicates how there was a decline in the poverty in India, right? So as India is progressing towards equitable development, right? So when I say equitable development, so it essentially means that the development is not concentrated in few sections of the society or few sectors. Rather, the equitable development, the developmental fruits would be distributed equitably across all sectors and all sections of the society. Now, we have been looking towards ensuring equitable development, and also adopting the social protection programs becomes very crucial in this sense, right? So social protection in the sense that, for example, we talk about insurance, we talk about healthcare insurance and pensions, and all those things comes under the social protection programs, providing food, healthcare, education, protecting people from the adverse effects of the climate change. So everything comes under this social protection, right? So when we are progressing towards equitable development, it is very important that we need to provide social protections to the people also. However, in this respect, there are certain measures which are required to be taken. So these measures have to be taken in this regard. So what are those measures? So the measures essentially include, we need to focus on economic growth. So economic growth is very important, right? So we cannot neglect the economic growth. So if there is economic growth, then there would be more demand, right? So it is like a cycle. So therefore, we need to ensure higher levels of economic growth, and we should also focus on addressing few issues which are responsible for the poverty, right? For example, imagine an area which is highly vulnerable to the disaster, such as droughts. Vidarbha and Marathwada in Maharashtra state, highly vulnerable to frequent droughts and water stress like conditions. Now, in those places, since they are highly vulnerable, crops will not grow. There will be bad harvest every year, and farmers will not be able to earn, decent amount of revenue through agriculture. But what we have to do, the government, civil society, and the communities need to be engaged in the water conservation and water conservation and water harvesting. So that is how we can overcome this drought-like conditions, water crisis in those areas. So therefore, there is a need to make different places resilient to disasters, especially the natural disasters. And healthcare should be provided to the different sections of the society. So healthcare is very, very important. It should not be neglected, because health plays a very important role in the development of human capital, right? So therefore, universal healthcare access is also very important, and we should also think about changes in the employment opportunities as well, right? So, however, we need to understand how poverty would impact India's economy and what will be the benefits of reducing the levels of poverty. So these two things that we have to understand here, right? So there is no doubt that poverty substantially and significantly impacts India's economy. There is no doubt about that, right? So because less number of people getting resources because of poverty, or this has been indicating that less number of people were getting the resources of the country. Now, when less number of people have been getting resources, but on the other hand, there are, a minor section of India's population were actually benefited by economic growth. So that will lead to the inequitable growth. Inequitable growth. Now, inequitable growth is not conducive in the long term, right? So it is not desirable in the long term, but because it creates a lot of problems for the economy in the long term. And after that, now rich becomes richer and poor becomes poorer. So whenever we have this inequitable economy in the long term, the rich will become richer and poor will become poorer. And in fact, in India also, this trend continues. Right, so this trend continues because top 10% of India's population own more than 70% of India's total wealth. Right, there are a lot of contrasts in terms of the distribution of the fruits of economic growth and economic development, distribution of wealth, distribution of income. There is a huge inequalities that were actually prevalent in India. Right, so poverty will lead to the low income generation whenever people are not getting adequate health care, adequate education. So the capacities of the people to be part of the economy, to become a productive workforce, would significantly declines whenever they don't get enough education and health care. So therefore they would not be an active contributors to the economy, and low income generation would also over a period of time impacts the overall economic growth and economic development. And this will also leads to the drop in living standards of the people, lower income, unemployment, poor health conditions and poor education, people very often vulnerable to violence, disasters. So that also leads to the drop in living standards of the people. And after that, cheap labor and manpower available to the economy because of poverty. So higher levels of poverty, unemployment that was existing, people would be ready to work for the economy at a lower wages, but even poor working conditions also, people ready to work, and gender inequality and lower rate of education. So all these are the basic impacts of the poverty. Impacts of poverty on Indian economy, right? So therefore it has been important that we need to reduce the poverty levels, right? So when we reduce poverty, so it is actually associated with number of benefits also. Okay, so it will enhance quality of life, healthcare, education and living standards of the people, and a more skilled and healthy workforce in the economy. And in fact, marginalized sections, marginalized communities would be empowered, women empowerment takes place, and increased consumer demand in the sense that more productivity, more production, more demand, more production. So that gives a boost to the economic growth and economic development, that creates employment opportunities, that attracts foreign direct investment, and it will increases the school attendance and school educational attainments and educational outcomes. Now see, the poverty cycle is very, very important that you have to draw whenever you are writing any answer in your examination, right? So generally what happens, if there is poverty, so due to poverty what happens, generally due to poverty, children don't go to school, they don't poor healthcare, poverty, poor healthcare, and poor healthcare, along with poor healthcare, so they don't attend schools also. Okay, so lack of education and poor healthcare and lack of education leads to what, poor educational outcomes, and so healthcare, poor healthcare means that they are vulnerable to diseases, right? So they were vulnerable to diseases, that they cannot be part of the healthy workforce, they cannot be part of the productive workforce, right? So all these factors again reinforces poverty, because lack of education, lack of proper work, and since they were not able to be part of the economy and productive workforce, so lack of economy, lack of money, and this lack of money, a lack of basic facilities, and again poverty, right? So this is how the cycle of poverty is actually reinforced, right? And apart from that, so the benefits includes greater social cohesion and increased awareness and capacity for the environmental stewardship. So all these are benefits of reducing levels of poverty. And next important article is with respect to the smart cities mission, right? So what is the smart cities mission? So the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has extended a deadline for the smart cities mission till March 2025, right? So in fact, the deadline for completion of smart city mission has been repeatedly extended by the government, because a number of projects within these smart cities were not yet completed, and because of that reason the government has decided to extend the deadline for completion of the projects in the smart cities mission by March 2025, so that all the smart cities which have the ongoing projects under the smart cities mission will complete the projects by 2025. Okay, so still around 10% of the projects were pending, sanctioned projects were pending in the smart cities mission, and because of that reason the government has extended deadline for the completion of the projects in the smart cities. Now, when we talk about the smart cities as a program was launched by the Union government in the year 2015, and under the smart cities mission around 100 cities in India will be selected and developed with all these facilities, right? So these cities will have a holistic infrastructure, right? So proper energy management, urban mobility, and telemedicine, teleeducation, trade facilitation centers, skill development centers, water management, waste management, e-governance. So all these facilities are being developed in these 100 smart cities by the government. So that is the objective of smart cities. Now, what is the concept of the smart cities, right? So we all knew that, in 2009 we have a global financial crisis, right? So 2009 we have this global financial crisis, and smart cities as a concept was emerged after this 2009 financial crash or global financial crisis. And in fact, the smart cities as a concept aimed to integrate the urban centers with advanced communication, right? So they wanted to integrate the urban cities or urban centers with advanced communication networks and infrastructure, right? So that is why, so all these infrastructure would be developed in these 100 smart cities. So they wanted to integrate these cities. They wanted to make these urban centers as engines of economic growth. And because of that reason, smart cities mission was launched by the Union government in the year 2015 to develop 100 smart cities. Now, what is the need for smart cities in India? Why we should develop smart cities, right? So it is said that according to a report, by 2030 in India, by 2030 we will have, India will be home to 60 cities. So India alone will have 60 cities with population of more than 1 million, right? So each city having a population of more than 10 lakh, around 60 cities by 2030, and 6 mega cities with a population of around 1 crore or 10 million population, right? So it is also expected that by 2030 total number of people who live in urban areas will also significantly increases. But currently the urban areas have been facing number of challenges, right? So unplanned urbanization is a challenge, lack of infrastructure is a challenge, growth and development of slums in these urban centers is a challenge. And these urban centers, because of poor planning, they have very often facing number of challenges. For example, recent Bengaluru water crisis, floods in these urban centers such as Mumbai and Hyderabad. So therefore planned urbanization is very important. Development of smart cities with smart infrastructure is also a very, very significant. Again, if I can emphasize that these urban areas have been facing number of challenges, and these challenges have been hindering the urban development and economic growth in these urban areas specifically, and when we talk about generally, they are hindering the total economic growth and economic development of India. Because see, urban areas are very often seen as engines of economic growth. So they are being seen as engines of economic growth. So majority of the GDP in India is generated from these urban centers, and therefore it is very important that we need to make the urban planning and development more and more robust. So whatever challenges and vulnerabilities that these urban areas have been facing, we must overcome those challenges. Right, when we talk about the challenges, poor local governance was a challenge, inadequate infrastructure and service a challenge, and even outdated urban planning is also another challenge. Okay, so we have mega cities such as Delhi, Mumbai. So these mega cities are regarded as the economic engines of India. Right, so despite being economic engines of India, these mega cities were not free from the disasters. right? So these mega cities have been facing number of vulnerabilities every year, because we can see that there was a heavy rainfall, and that heavy rainfall leading to the floods, and recently Delhi floods also, and water crisis. So therefore they have been facing number of challenges because of outdated urban planning, outdated infrastructure, poor urban planning, unplanned urbanization, inadequate infrastructure and services, poor local governance. And in fact, there has been a significant growth in rural urban migration also. So this rural urban migration has been leading to the growth of slums, because these urban areas are very often not able to accommodate people who are migrating from rural areas to the urban areas, right? So smart cities mission progress so far, right? So as of July 3, 2024, around 100 smart cities were involved in this smart cities programs, right? So when it was launched in 2015, so 100 smart cities will be selected for the development of holistic development of infrastructure in these 10 smart cities, right? So out of these 100 smart cities, so total 100 smart cities, so around 7,188 sanctioned projects were successfully completed in these smart cities. So these projects are around 90% of the total sanctioned projects. So we can say that 90% of the sanctioned projects in the smart cities mission were successfully completed. So all these projects, the 90% projects, were worth of 1,44,237 crore rupees. And in fact, additionally, there were 830 more projects worth of 19,926. So they are also nearing completion. And in fact, the government has also allocated budget for these 100 smart cities, and the projects which are proposed to be completed in this smart cities. So Government of India has allocated 48,000 crore for these smart cities. Now, Government of India will not alone spend funds for the smart cities program. Rather, state governments will also contribute for the development of smart cities. And cities have already utilized 93% of released funds for various developmental projects, right? So Government of India has provided full financial support to 74 out of 100 smart cities participating in this smart cities program, right? So this is actually the report card of the smart cities program. However, smart cities have been facing number of challenges. Now, what are the challenges that they have been confronting very often, right? So as I've already told you that these smart cities have been facing number of challenges, like lack of infrastructure, poor governance, unplanned urbanization. So all these factors, but smart cities, urban local bodies, specifically lacking the core competencies. They lack technology, they lack trained manpower, they lack finances. So these factors have been impacting the implementation of the smart cities program, right? So even if you look into the infrastructure in these urban areas and infrastructure with the urban municipal governance, it is also very, very poor, and that has been creating a lot of challenges. And apart from that, local challenges which are related to land, labor, so they also slow down the progress in the smart cities program. And apart from that, there is also a number of other challenges. For example, irregularities in the implementation of the smart cities program, and duplication of work is being done, corruption, and so project cost higher than the market rate, frequent dropping of projects after finalization of proposals. These all challenges have been plaguing the implementation of the smart cities program. So these programs have to be looked into, they have to be assessed and evaluated properly. And special purpose vehicles were created for the implementation of smart cities program in each of these cities. And in fact, they also are facing uncertainty because they won't receive further funding for operations, including integrated command and control centers. So these special purpose vehicles were also ineffective in terms of implementation of the smart cities program in letter and spirit. However, so when we talk about the solution for this problem with respect to smart cities, the information and communication technology, sensors, geospatial, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain are very important. so that they can tackle the emerging problems in city and also maintain law and order through a detailed data analysis. And apart from that, the geospatial visualization, HD maps and 3D models are very, very important, but we essentially focus on revitalizing or rejuvenating the municipal governance, and improving the capacities of urban local bodies is very, very important for the success of the smart cities program. So next important article is about Pantanal, right? So this Pantanal is world's largest tropical wetland. Okay, so you just remember this because such questions are being asked very often by the UPSC. So this Pantanal is the world's largest tropical wetland, and this is located in 3 countries, right? So in South America, Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia. So in these 3 countries, so this Pantanal tropical wetland is located, and it is largest tropical wetland in the world. So 80% of this Pantanal wetland is located in just Brazil itself. However, this Pantanal wetland, world's largest tropical wetland, has been experiencing unprecedented or significant increase in the forest fires in recent times due to the water loss, right? So it has been losing water despite it is a wetland, and that has led to a significant increase in the forest fires in this Pantanal wetland. And in fact, a recent study has also highlighted that this area covered by water within the Pantanal wetland, the area covered by water in 2023 is more than 61% below average. So therefore it has been significantly impacting the ecosystem of this Pantanal wetland, right? So when we talk about this Pantanal's water loss, in 2023 only 2.6% of the Pantanal was covered by water, right? So you can imagine that just 2.6% of the total wetland is covered with the water. And in fact, this 2.6%, there is a drastic decline in the water levels compared to the previous years because of extreme dry conditions, making the region prone to number of wildfires. Now generally with wildfires, what happens, it will lead to the loss of biodiversity. So it is a very well known fact, right? So it will lead to the loss of biodiversity and extinction of species, and even habitat fragmentation, and forest fires are very often lead to the increasing global warming and all. So because of the frequent forest fires, it will lead to the loss of biodiversity. But Pantanal is very often or well known for its rich biodiversity, and in fact it hosts a number of species such as jaguars, capybaras. So because of the forest fires and drying of this tropical wetland, so that has endangered these species and their habitats very often, right? So in fact, the Amazonian rainforest or Amazon rainforest has also faced challenges with reduction in the water surface. And this has also impacted fish population, the indigenous fish and dolphin populations. And there were also severe droughts, right? So the Pampa grasslands and the Cerrado showed a mixed results in water surface changes, because both anthropogenic factors and even the natural factors have also contributed to this. But we can say that 90% of the decline in this Pantanal wetland and the forest fires that were taking place is because of increased human intervention or anthropogenic factors, right? When I say this about this Pantanal, so it is located in Brazil and South Africa. As I have already said that 80% of this Pantanal is located in Brazil itself. So this is world's largest freshwater wetland, and it is seasonally flooded plain fed by the tributaries of the Paraguay River. There was a river called Paraguay River, and this Paraguay River flood this wetland seasonally. Now when I say about its location, it is located in the upper Paraguay river basin, and in fact it is located in Bolivia, Brazil and Paraguay. So 80% of this Pantanal is located in Brazil itself, right? So it sprawls across 3 countries, Bolivia, Brazil and Paraguay. Now what is the major habitat type of this wetland? The major habitat type is flooded grassland. Savanna is the major wetland type of this Pantanal wetland. And in fact, when we talk about this wetland, it is also not just known for the biodiversity, but it is also known for world's most productive habitats. So it is one of the world's most productive habitat. So we need to talk about the flora and fauna also. So it also has a diverse species such as jaguar. So highest density in the world is in just this pentanal wetland. And giant otters, capybaras, they are largest rodent species. Anteaters, tapirs, caimans, and diverse array of birds such as toucans and jabiru storks. So all these species that we just discussed are found in this pentanal wetland. So next important article is about the particulate matter 2.5 pollution. So this is very serious, particulate matter 10, right? So it is a very small and minute dust that can easily reaches to lungs. So therefore causing a severe illness because of their minute size. They even enter into the bloodstream also. So that is the challenge. So recent Lancet study has revealed that there was a serious link between air pollution and deaths that have been taking place in cities like Delhi. Because if you look into the levels of air pollution in these cities, so most of the air pollution is concentrated in cities like Delhi. So pollution particles such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, so they can cause respiratory issues such as coughing and even chest tightness also. Now, what are the key highlights of this Lancet study? So Lancet has highlighted that between 2008 and 2019, so around 7.2% of the total deaths, approximately 33,000 individuals every year in 10 cities died because of the air pollution levels. Severe air pollution levels led to the death or killing of around 7.2% of total 7.2% of the individuals. Because very often in India's metropolitan cities, the air quality levels are significantly poor. Okay, so the air quality levels are below than India's national clean air threshold. And in fact, Delhi has recorded the highest number of air pollution related deaths in this particular study period of 2008 to 2019. Right, so in Delhi alone, so the deaths due to air pollution was 11.5%, around 12,000 deaths a year. And in fact, India's clean air norms are presently well above the World Health Organization guidelines of 15 micrograms in every cubic meter of air. So however, these measures are not sufficient. Rather, we need to be more and more aggressive and proactive when it comes to reducing the levels of pollution, particulate matter 2.5, particulate matter 10 in these urban centers. So we already switched to the Bharat stage emission norm 6. So that would to some extent reduces the pollutants released by the vehicles. And apart from that, it is also very important that we need to make a faster transition towards electric vehicles. And secondly, we need to impose certain restrictions on regulations on construction sites in these urban areas. So they also releases these pollutants. And apart from that, in cities like Delhi, stubble burning is another major problem. And apart from stubble burning, we need to impose certain regulations on the industries which are emitting these pollutants into the atmosphere to address this problem. Right. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. If you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.